Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Cisilion Fireside chat. So we've never had music before in the intro, so I was bopping along there to the music. So thank you, marketing team. Welcome as always to our customer advisory panel. As it's been a little while, I'll let you just very quickly say hello and introduce yourselves again. So if I go clockwise around my screen, I'll start with Aidan.
Aidan Shanahan, Head of IT with Govia Thameslink Railway.
Thank you. And Dave?
David Maskell, Information Security Officer at Thatcham Research.
Thank you. Paul?
Hi there, Paul Clark, Deputy Director of IT at L&Q.
And Ken?
Hi, Ken, CTO at Leathwaite.
Thank you. And Madassa?
Hi, my name is Madassa, CIO at Waverton Investment Management.
Fantastic. And I think we did have Jazz with us a minute ago from Gately, but he seems to be having connectivity trouble, so we'll crack on without him. So, we're going to talk again today about, we've feels like we've done hybrid work to death a little bit, but it's something that sort of continually comes up, and I think, you know, as everyone is finally seeing, we've had lots of proper in-person events this year. There's Enterprise Connect in a couple of weeks. There's been Security Expo and all sorts of events of late, and it's nice to see, you know, footfall through the cities again, and people coming back into work. But I think, you know, one of the things I think that is still far from perfect is the way in which hybrid meetings are conducted. Firstly, from a technology perspective. Secondly, from a kind of people and etiquette perspective. So actually how these meetings are actually conducted and run. And then I guess from a kind of a technology and a process perspective. And the reason we picked the topic today was, you know, I think we've all of us are probably experiencing meetings that are substandard in terms of, you know, how they would be if they were all remote, or how they would have been if they were all in person. And I was chatting just before we kicked off today. I was on a customer video call last week with about half the people in the room and half remote from various different places overseas, etc. And it was just a really I wasn't hosting, but it was a really appalling experience. You know, some people had cameras on, some didn't. There was a camera in the room that wasn't quite facing the audience. People were scribbling on physical whiteboards in the room and then posting pictures of the whiteboard into chat, and it was just it felt really poorly organized. And there was nothing wrong with the content, particularly of the meeting, and, you know, the presenters kind of knew what they were covering and things, but it just kind of got me thinking as to kind of, guys, you know, is this really how far we've come in 3 years since lockdown? And so I wanted to use this as a bit of a topic, really, to think about, you know, from your own organizations, how is hybrid really working? What tips have you got to actually make hybrid work properly? You know, and let's just be clear, when we say hybrid, you know, that is the environment where, you know, some of the people are in a physical meeting room or meeting rooms that could be connected, and other people are remote. So I'm just really keen on your views, just kind of what works, what doesn't, what etiquettes you put in place, what technology you've deployed, changed, ripped out in order to make hybrid work. So who wants to kick us off?
Well, I suppose we'd already kind of made the decision to go with Teams meeting room systems prior to any of the parts of the pandemic at all, really. So we got, I think at the time there was a trial, so we got a couple of different units from different manufacturers with Microsoft, and got them put into a couple of offices. And pandemic happened, and then we kind of went full bore, really. It's kind of, we went, I mean, we evaluated 2 or 3 different sort of solutions from different providers at the time. We ended up going with Yealink as a manufacturer, just because it was easy. It was the nice small, medium and large sort of different sizing for rooms, whether you went with sort of multiple cameras or with the all-in-one collaboration bar style thing for the small rooms. And I suppose we've gone into that in a big way. It's we've a fun choice when our EA renews as to whether we go for the premium or the standard licensing, because they've obviously changed all that along the way, and see whether we need to go for premium. I'm sure we probably will end up finding some feature we have, but we even went with the panels for outside the room. So we've got the Teams meeting room panel outside the room to sort of show occupancy, and then we've got as a kind of a standard a collaboration bar, kind of I think an A20 or an A30 in most of the small rooms as an all-in-one unit with a TV above it. And knowing my staff, we went for the simpler things where kind of like the panel inside the room is on the wall, so there's less chance of cables being disconnected or things like that. And we went for sort of the larger collaborative spaces where we've got a couple of rooms which can be joined or split. Then we went with sort of the larger size kit from them with ceiling mounted mics, for example, to sort of reduce any sort of issues again with people moving desks or cables around in the dual function rooms. Don't just be bound by what the manufacturer sort of says there is there by default, I would say. I think have a look at what would really make it work with your facilities and your HR departments, in particular around what we're sort of showing. And I suppose we've never looked back really. We've rolled out from probably initial starting 10 to 15 rooms. We're probably up to about 40 now, and that's very much been based around other sites coming on stream. And again, this is very much a post-pandemic thing where we're looking at sort of collaboration spaces which wouldn't really probably have been used in that same way at all previously. It would have been a meeting room in a depot or in a large station or things like that, where you kind of go, suddenly people are looking to sort of utilize space in sort of collaboration or hub spaces rather than it being just the big main offices where people would mainly be doing meetings or stuff like that. Then there is that fact that kind of everyone could be a mix across all of our different sites. So we've definitely deployed a lot more than we thought we ever would do initially. We thought we'd do our big 3 offices and maybe 1 room in each of the big depots kind of thing to sort of give you around about sort of that 20 mark. And we've easily sort of doubled that with other spaces and other things. I think the couple of things which are coming along which are going to make a tangible difference for us is the room remote, to allow them to sort of use it on their phone to sort of control the room. So we're liking that a lot, and or the idea of that a lot. And I suppose we have the mix of Windows and Android versions, because the smaller versions are all Android, the larger versions are all Windows based with a PC hiding behind the scenes somewhere. But overall, positively received. Yes, there was that bit of initial kind of thing of how do I use this, and we ran sort of drop-in sessions in kind of most of the major sites to sort of familiarise staff with it. But again, most people have got used to using Teams during the pandemic and gone big into Teams doing that. So it was quite easy in some ways, because it was like, just invite the room to your meeting, and kind of once they got through that, then it's like, yes, if it all works perfectly, you walk in, you press the panel, and away you go. The biggest probably learnings we've had with it is how we manage collaborating with externals, and kind of how do you manage with getting someone in the room. So kind of if an external guest comes in, we'll probably more likely dial them into the room as a Teams call, even if they just want to share content on the screen, because it means you don't have dongles or adapters or anything else like that, or cabling on the desks and dongles which go missing. So we've kind of gone for if someone comes in external, get them on the guest Wi-Fi and then join them on as a guest to the room that way. And then the other couple of things really have been where you've got external partners who want to collaborate in a different system, then how you manage that interface, and again, who hosts. So by default, we tell our staff to host on Teams because it's way easier for our staff, controlled with our lobby and everything else, and kind of, so by default we try and do it that way. And then it's kind of, if the staff members want to be invited to an external and want to invite the room, you almost have to say, no, invite me as a person, then I'll dial the room in when I go into the meeting, and set that expectation. That's the way you do it with. So if I don't know, an external partner company was hosting it on their tenant, you can't really invite the room easily. It'll auto reject a bunch of stuff. So the easiest way we found to do that is say, just invite the person books the room themselves, goes into the room, and then dials the screen in, and it's working well now, to be fair.
And how thank you, that's a good overview of kind of what you've done and where that's developed. From a kind of etiquette perspective, and I think if my point at the beginning was more about, I think people, it's quite common to or certainly my experience, it's quite common to get a sort of disjointed experience, I guess, in the fact that you kind of go around a room when you've got people in person. You might use a physical whiteboard, you might share content, when meetings aren't just about meetings, when we are actually sharing content, brainstorming those things, do you feel like everybody is pretty good at this now, or are there still kind of challenges to overcome from, whether that's an adoption issue, whether that's confidence in actually using the tools that are available, or whether people just kind of forget, right, and still address either the virtual room they're in or the room they're in? I guess, are we using the full features available to us?
Well, I think we went for the bigger kits, which does speaker tracking now. So that we've swapped a couple of cameras out in a couple of rooms. So for the big rooms where we'd have kind of like a 20-person boardroom or things like that, when it's in the wider sort of configuration, we swapped the cameras out, so it does do the active speaker tracking, so it will follow the person around the room, because we thought that was a better experience for the people remotely. Because if it's showing a wide angle shot of 20 people in a room and you're remote and it's like someone down the far end's talking, you're not going to get the best of experience. So we did swap the cameras out for that. The other thing we'd say is in the smaller rooms, which doesn't necessarily do some of that sort of, it'll frame generally, and it won't necessarily zoom in on the person if the room is there and there's 5 or 6 in the room. Does the speaker set if someone is speaking like that, do they dial in on their laptop as well with no audio? And they've got a lot better at sort of making sure that you don't get the howling feedback, but whether they dial in on the laptop so the people remotely can see the room as well as the individual speaker. I think people have got a lot better at kind of monitoring, almost getting their buddy to monitor whether if they're presenting, because do you see the hands remotely coming up or not? And kind of they've almost got a bit better with sort of asking someone else to sort of flag or sort of or point out to them if they're presenting the camera really, or content, should I say. But could it be better? Yeah, I mean, it could be. It is always that thing. It's easier if you're all in the room or you're all remote. If you are the half and half, or a couple of meeting rooms and about 20 people remotely, is it has been as good as it's been in the room? I don't think it is. But
can I just jump in on, because I think what Aidan called there was actually talk to kind of the journey that we're all been on with meeting rooms, right? And it wasn't that long ago where we weren't talking about conference suites like Teams, etc. No. Zoom was kind of floating around, but literally only 3 or 4 years ago, I was still in organizations where you were still buying teleconference suites. You were going to Polycom, you were going to Cisco, you were buying WebEx, you were paying a small fortune. You only had 1 or 2 rooms because it was such an expensive thing. Coordinating it, who's hosting this? Because do you have a SIP trunk? Do you have a ISDN line? You'd be your team would be dialing up and checking all the lines came up. And that was 4 or 5 years ago. Yes, we had a pandemic that focused the mind, but also the technological shift to actually using integrated systems that are on everybody's desktop, calling from anywhere, that has been seismic. And I actually think we expect a lot of people, but actually, if you think about the change that we've gone through, unless you were a truly bleeding edge firm that lived in Slack and did that actually what we're encouraging people to do was taking them right out of their wheelhouse. Now, pandemic helped a lot with that. We're not going to give pandemic credit for a lot of things, but maybe the innovation is one of those. And it forced people to really focus on being present in the meetings. This is something that, tech aside, actually also paying attention, and that drove etiquette as well. So I was based out in Asia, nobody used cameras, and it was very, very hard to really get a sense of what was going on. And it's very noticeable being in the UK that people are far more engaged with the systems. And I think that was because etiquette was driven. The firms I've worked for, it is very much a case of you have your camera on, people are expecting to see you. And also the culture as if you are in a meeting room, to Aidan's point, tracking cameras, getting an appropriate sized room. If you're only 4 people, don't go and book the boardroom and sit at the far end so that nobody can get a sense of who's joining in the conversation. And I actually think, and certainly from my personal experience, the etiquette has been really quite remarkable, because when you go back to the old days of the Avayas and the Polycom systems, people would scatter around the room. Nobody could hear who was talking. And actually, we're now driving to that far more engaged meeting where I'm going to say something maybe a little bit contentious. I'm not too bothered about the mixed environment, because actually we're finding that the behaviors within sort of my firm, that actually people are really quite considerate. They will make an appropriate, only if the rooms are, look, at the end of the day, if there's no room available, they're in the boardroom, but they will then sit closer to the camera, etc. the idea of bringing your own machine in so that you've actually got the content as well as being in the room and everything else. Again, those behaviors just facilitate people being far more engaged in the meetings. And then, you know, sticking to please don't talk over each other, put your hands up, etc. And managing the meetings. It's taken me back to when I first kind of started going into big meetings, and there being someone who took notes, a chair of the room, making sure that people weren't talking over each other. And actually, I think there's a lot to be said for this. I think there's been quite substantial improvements. Could the tech be better? Yes. But could people in the room's behaviors be better? A number of times I've sat in a room where there's 10 people and everybody's talking over each other, and the presenter is being ignored because they're talking about a football match at the other end of the table, right? I mean, etiquette is etiquette, no matter whether it's over tech or not. And I think the piece that I take from it, and as Aidan talked about that journey, is that, yes, we're still going on that journey. There's still more we could do, and we can kind of iron out the kinks, but things are actually markedly improved on what we maybe look back with kind of rose-tinted glasses on before the pandemic.
And I think you're right about that, you know, that pace of change, and, you know, the entry point, the cost entry point to this technology, you say, and it was already, you know, a lot lower, right? But pre-pandemic, but I think you're right. It's just enabled people to try things out without those sort of 20,000, £30,000 investments that you would have had to make before. And, you know, it's been incredible what we've seen. Some of it makeshift, and now obviously, you know, making things more permanent. I think the etiquette stuff, I think is sounds like you've got that well nailed. And I think the thing I always find with it is it's you can be very disciplined in your own organization, but you don't know what you don't know you're going to join. And I think, you know, my experience last week was just shocking, right? And it was a meeting I was joining expecting an experience that, you know, I would have felt proud to host, and it was actually a bit of a sham. So it is interesting because it completely shifts that dynamic. Whereas that point about when it was all an in-person meeting before, you kind of have, I think everyone has a certain level of expectation of how things were going to be. I mean, I had people getting up, you know, getting coffee and walking in front of the camera, and it was just, you know, it was probably the worst example I could use, but it just really resonated to wow, you know, this is where, yeah, and maybe it's just an etiquette. It wasn't a technology fail necessarily.
Rob, can I just cut in there though? But if you were in an old-fashioned room, getting up and walking in front of the camera is not particularly good etiquette, right? I mean, that's
no, very true. Very true. Very, very true.
Just very quickly, I think just on we've said a bit about behaviours, but I think there's also a piece about making sure that people that are invited to meetings are the right people to be in the meetings themselves, because we find that there's a piece about people being included, but also being engaged. So I think if you're remote to a meeting, there's always been this thing, do you feel included? So we've tried to work on that to some degree, right, by making sure that where people are in a physical room, they're still using the chat to, you know, be part of the commentary alongside the meeting. They're still using the hands up type approach, so that everyone's doing the same thing to be part of the meeting itself. But also those people that are joining a meeting that don't need to be there, because we've always done this, right? You know, we've got legacy meeting requests that have gone out and people are still on the list because they always have been. And we've got people that attend a meeting, don't know why they're there, but, you know, are too scared to maybe say they shouldn't be. So I think it's about, you know, making sure we've got the right people in the room, whether it's virtual or remote. I think the other thing we found quite useful for bigger meetings where we've got the hybrid is that we have an in-person chair in the physical space, but also a kind of someone that's not necessarily the chair of the meeting, but there to assist the chair that's remote, so they can kind of just, you know, check in with that person that's in the room, that gets kind of more focused on the people around the table rather than those that are in the virtual space. So I think that's quite important. One of the things that I don't think we've fixed yet, but I think Microsoft have in their plans, is around when you send an invite to people, is knowing if they will join in person or virtually. Because you accept a meeting request and you've got no idea whether they'll be in the room at the same time as you or whether they'll just join from somewhere else. So I think that would be really good when it comes. And I think I've seen that mentioned somewhere in the Microsoft space.
Yes, delayed. I think another one of those delayed things. And I guess that's part of the, that probably brings on to a question. Actually, we've had to, one of the team that I know, Ross Fry. So Ross, thank you for your question. But actually, one of the things that we see a lot, and I know we talk about it, is just that pace of feature change as well. So I think, it's great to have all these new features and all these things. I mean, I think we had in our tenant light up the other day that if you raise your hand, Teams detects if you're talking and then lowers it again once you've started talking. That was quite clever. But how do we keep users up to date with all these new features that are kind of rolling out? And I think particularly, Aidan, you made a point about you use a mix of Android and Windows based devices, and as we know, some features come to Android rooms later than they come to Teams rooms on Windows and things. And of course, people are on different tenants, so some of you will get updates before others. There's preview programs, those kind of things, and of course there's now Teams Premium as well. So how do we ensure users are up to date on how to use these new tools that are coming out, and they don't just default back to it's just a video call?
I think firstly, being in technology, Microsoft do a lot of the work for us, right? In the old days, we'd have to do so much work to roll out new features, and Microsoft do that for us. I think we're in a really lucky position, but adoption is so important. So we tend to do a monthly roll-up on Yammer. So we have a modern workplace community on Yammer. Everyone gets enrolled into that, and it's quite an active community. So it's not just technology telling people things or helping, it's also other people across our organisation, answering questions and supporting each other. So we tend to do an announcement once a month on Yammer. I know Yammer's been rebranded, but at the moment it is what it is within our organisation, and we kind of roll up the things that we think are important. And obviously, Microsoft do a lot of that in terms of the release notes and communications. So we kind of just push that through.
Thanks, Paul. Anyone else got any?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I think we need to do more. I think we did, like everyone else in the pandemic, we put SharePoint sites, intranet sites up with videos, how-to guides and things like that. If I'm honest, some of those are still there and probably very much out of date to what the platform is today. But we've introduced this year Learning Bites, so we're going to have in-person sessions and enable those to be done remotely and recorded as well, where we're training users, and very much like the modern workplace idea, and we're just trying to embrace that and take people on that journey. I think we got caught recently because we have the check-in service on the rooms, where it releases the rooms if somebody doesn't check in. That functionality changed in the last month or so that caught us out a little bit. Maybe we missed the release notes from Microsoft, but there's an example of where we were perhaps not on the ball as much as we should have been, and getting those communications out ahead of time.
Good shout. So hopefully, Ross, that gave you a few ideas. If not, please reach out. The other bit I wanted to touch on then is I guess I'm keen on your view of how meeting spaces are managed. So going back to the point about meeting room bookings and things, is that a challenge? I mean, we've talked about booking the right room for the right size and making sure that we've got the right occupancy and those kind of things. Is booking rooms becoming a challenge, knowing where people are in the office, coming from home? Are we seeing meetings rooms get booked with no one physically attending? And how are we better managing, those hump days as they're known?
Yeah, so we've gone back to being rather old school in the fact that we have now somebody at reception managing our rooms, because the difference between a Monday and a Thursday is immense. And nobody really minds if somebody books a room on a Monday and then doesn't use the room, or turns up 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late. And what we're finding on a Thursday, where every single meeting room, every single pod that we have is booked, is used, and we again don't use any tracking system to know who is in the office or not in the office. We have a hoteling, hot desk suite, whatever you want to call it, and our capacities can go from literally having virtually no one in the office through to maximum capacity in the space of 1 week. And so managing and administering the meeting rooms accordingly is becoming really challenging. And the suite of tools to manage it remotely is quite difficult, because you can't see who is physically in the room if you're in, I don't know, somewhere on the South Coast. So there is a real requirement there where, and we've got sensors in the room that's supposed to check when somebody's in, but somebody walks in, walks out, triggers it, whatever, and actually their reliability around some of that technology isn't the most robust for us. It may be our implementation, but I'm not knocking the product, but it's a case of, and actually it's funny what David just said there about the auto checking out piece, and I wasn't aware of that, so that actually is something now I'm going to need to go and check on. But it is that kind of, again, trying to get the dynamics right, because even though we might have a full office, we'll still have lots of people working from home, and it's kind of the gel of holding it all together. And I'm not sure what that best model looks like. We've gone back to having a human being actually engaged because they've got line of sight. Whether that works for a larger organization or multiple sites in multiple countries, I'm not so sure it does. But and I think that is a gap.
Paul, David, you've got lots of rooms. How have you tackled that one?
From my point of view, it's we're just using it 100% digital and 100% of the tools that are there. So the rooms are getting booked. There are those days that there are no meeting spaces, and that's one of those days today where I'm borrowing an office to use for where I'm going to have this call. But in general, we've sort of expanded the number of rooms we've got available, and they're being used. The fact that I take the point, and hopefully the technology will get there as to whether people are going to be actually present in the room or whether they're going to be working remote. I think that'll be good to get that one solved. But the rooms do now release in 10 minutes. If somebody doesn't check into the room, if the meeting doesn't start, they get released. Now, the slight challenge we've had internally with that is people just go into the room and start talking. They haven't checked in at the panel on the door. They haven't joined the Teams meeting. The room releases, then somebody then books it and turns up and sort of, I've got this room booked. So that itself is the biggest challenge that we're having at the moment.
I think for us, we've probably got a problem on certain days of the week with meeting space, but at the same time, we've tried to encourage people to use the other types of areas that have been set up since COVID. So we've got lots of kind of couched areas. We've got loads of kind of booths and pods that are kind of non-bookable. So we're encouraging them to use kind of the more flexible spaces rather than just the kind of meeting rooms that they would have done in the past. Meeting rooms. If you're an individual and you're on a call, do you need a meeting room, or can you do it out in the open in a couch area? If it's private and confidential, you can probably do it in the open, but you may need a room if not.
Those little booths are really good, aren't they? We're buying a handful for our spaces, and I do love the idea of pick up. I know some are putting those kind of dedicated huddle devices in that you can just walk up and like Teams collaboration displays or whatever they are, and others just taking their laptop and off you go, and they work really well, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So similar to David, we use booking for meeting rooms and desks actually, and I think it's taken a little bit of time for people to adapt to it, and obviously some of the policies that you apply, whether it's the auto cancel ones or whether it's certain people in the organization that need additional privileges to book multiple rooms at the same time or multiple desks at the same time or on behalf of other people where there may be an exec assistant, for example. Those are the sorts of things that kind of took some time to iron out, but I feel we've kind of got there now, and we get good stats back from the room data. And
a couple of you mentioned sensors and stuff. Do you see them becoming quite widely adopted? Occupancy sensors, air quality sensors, heat and ventilation, those kind of things, or is it more just for space, utilization management?
Actually, we're moving down a route of having far more detailed data on things like air quality, usage, temperature. We're looking at some modeling around what that means for us about how we use the space. Is there a correlation between why some rooms do get used, some don't? And at the same time, we're looking at things like LEED certification for our architecture. Leathwaite has a very, very dynamic approach to diversity, D&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for example, companies like MindSpot that actually do neurodiverse architecture. I know that all sounds very kind of woolly, but actually it's really quite fascinating about certain rooms don't get used because it's too bright, and actually people with certain conditions don't enjoy being in very white spaces. Likewise, if there's low level lighting, and there's more and more science behind this, and actually using the tracking of why is that room always left empty? What is it that that room means? That is it just because it's at the end of the corridor, or is it actually something to do with air quality? And things with COVID have focused the mind a little bit around, actually the ventilation in this room is poor, the heating in this room is better, etc. We find people like our pods because they've got separate air control and aircon. And it's really interesting that every time you go into a pod, it's always a couple of degrees cooler than the rest of the office. And it's just those things that we're kind of trying to get some of that data together, just so as we go, that your real estate is something that you're kind of stuck with. You commit to leases, you do your building work, but when it comes to the meeting rooms, you're actually looking to get the best value out of those spaces, which could be dead, right? At the end of the day, if nobody's using it, that's dead square footage. So you really, really do want to get behind the scenes and understand why certain things aren't being used.
It's really fascinating. Yeah, really fascinating. Anyone else going into that kind of extent of looking at how those spaces are used?
I think we remodeled one of the major offices and reduced space basically, and as part of that remodel, it was an interesting challenge of removing some offices to create more desk space and more collaboration space areas. And even now we're reviewing that again and going around the loop. It's kind of, we went from kind of like assigned desks to hot desking with a power app to manage booking a desk. Ours had always kind of booked meeting rooms based on Exchange and a third-party panel system. Obviously, we've moved to Teams meeting room systems, so we went with the Teams panels to make the displays nice and easy with the check-in sort of kick you out issue. We never really, I mean, even pre-pandemic, the meeting rooms were always oversubscribed no matter what, really. So we'd already got the exec assistants kind of with control of a percentage of the rooms, which are generally the larger, bigger boardroom style rooms. Then they always had control of those, predating anything to do with the pandemic. So they still have that control over the accepting of people, sort of. But there was a kind of an adoption journey to kind of go from getting rid of the third party system and going full Microsoft, because they found it a lot easier to change rooms and bookings around in the third party system. It was that because it wasn't linked to the Teams call, it wasn't linked to everything else. If they suddenly kind of went, okay, I need these rooms for the whatever reason, whether it's external partners or DFT or the exec, and had to kick people out, they'd have just moved it in the third party system previously. Whereas now they have to contact the person who's booked the room and go through that process of actually, you can't just kind of move it around in your own calendar. You need to get almost the booker of the meeting room to move it around. Otherwise it'll break all their Teams meetings. And if you're bouncing them from 4 to 3 or 2 to 7 because of the different sort of size of the rooms, then I suppose there's a lot more negotiation, should we say, which happens with and sometimes that is you're doing this because X needs the room kind of thing. But I think that's probably the biggest difference we found, is that mindset of you can't just move stuff around anymore. You have to talk to the person, because you'll screw up their Teams meeting attached to that room as well. We are going to buy some pods. It's the kind of things of, why do you need a 4 to 6 person meeting room if you're on a one-to-one call? Okay, the content is private, fine. If the high back chairs we've got, the zigzag desks aren't working, then we're going to have to buy some small pods. And we'll be looking at the sort of the all-in-one collaborate. One of the decisions we've got to make once we've sourced some of the pods and actually got them installed is, do we look at going full-blown collaboration sort of bar you walk in and sort of ping to go, or do you go with just somewhere for them to put their laptop in and charge, really? One of the biggest decisions we made was actually, we were doing a monitor refresh, and we went with docking monitors with cameras, and we also went with camera monitors for desktops. And that's the first time we've ever considered doing that. And it was, suddenly you've got kind of people who kind of, you don't want to disenfranchise the staff who use a desktop in sort of some of our sites. So you kind of go, actually, let's ship a camera monitor out with it so that you can use a headset and a camera when
funny mindset, isn't it? Because you end up with 2 screens otherwise, as you say, and you're looking at a camera down here, or you're looking at a screen up there and a camera down here, and people are getting very weird shots of your nose or whatever else. Aidan, you raised earlier on around Teams Premium as an example, right? Yeah. But I think obviously the reason I wanted to raise that was that there's an event on Thursday Microsoft are running. You've probably seen it. This what's it called? The Future of Work: Reinventing Productivity with AI, which I think is all going to be around Microsoft's investment in OpenAI and what we're going to start to see in the kind of core productivity tools that we use every day. So obviously we've got some clever stuff in our collaboration tools today. So I think I touched on the you raise your hand as you start talking, it puts your hand down type features. There's of course things like audio transcription and even multi-language transcription services where it kind of syncs to the video. But if you kind of think about where the technologies have come over the last few years, and Ken, you raise a really good point about that, that pace of adoption and pace of change. But what do you think is missing? What do you think might, we don't know what's going to be announced, right? But where would you like to see AI, right? Let's use the famous buzzword 2023. But where do you think there could be real value that comes into these tools to make meetings either more inclusive, easier to use, easier for people to get up to speed with what's going on, or is it all a big fad? Madassa, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I had a few conversations internally with my investment managers, and one of the biggest issues they have is post-meeting write-ups and notes. And what was interesting was a question was asked, can I approach Microsoft to ask how, following the acquisition of ChatGPT, they'll start incorporating a method of summarizing the meeting in a form of minutes. So I think an element of post-meeting summary transcription or meeting notes would be a very valuable asset to meetings, because I think it's fair to say many of these PAs or TAs that have to churn through the transcriptions of the voice calls post meetings does take up a huge amount of time, and then the post review alongside those that are leading the meeting. So I think in my view, I think that will be a substantial improvement in terms of how meetings are conducted and obviously managed with the use of AI. So I think AI could really benefit that aspect. I'm hoping that it is introduced, because it would really benefit those that are constantly writing up post minutes.
It's a Teams premium feature. I don't think it's there yet, but it's a Teams premium feature, certainly, that was announced. So yeah, watch this space, I think. Interesting. Could it replace the PA? That's a really interesting one, isn't it? It's got to get very good at recording actions. I think that's one of the things it's going to do, is it will detect, if someone says, Aidan, can you do X, Y, Z, it will actually try and capture those and put them into tasks. So I think it'd be really interesting to see whether that's just the most annoying thing in the world that we all turn off because we end up with these random actions that actually mean nothing, or whether it could revolutionize it.
It's a bit like Microsoft Viva, right? When Viva puts recommendations, and
that's quite clever, actually. I find that's quite useful.
Yeah, so something similar, but yeah, who knows?
Anyone else? What do we think?
It's quite interesting because WebEx has actually had a summary feature on their transcription for a little while now. It's not AI. It's a bit clunky to that point where but it actually does it edits out when people say and ums and all that bit, and gives you a more concise body of text to work through, and also attributes more sort of explicit statements to the attendees. We've all seen ChatGPT. We've seen how good the conversational piece is. And as Microsoft owns it, you'd hope that they would find a way of implementing that in a way that would be really quite powerful, i.e., can you read through this body of text and summarize it for me? And so I think it would be a real trick lost if they don't. I think, again, it will be a case of the early adopters really have to fight through the sludge a little bit to start with. Yeah. But and again, the trouble with AI is it has to do it to learn. So you have to go through the sludge to get there. Yeah. But it's that whole linking the meetings, Viva. So if Aidan cancels on this meeting today, what impact does that have on my schedule? Does the AI look at that and go, hey, Ken, do you want to reorganize this meeting with Aidan because this appeared as a high, and go, well, I can't reschedule this because it's the fireside chat, and having the nuance to understand what's going on in my diary to assist. So, and you say, is it the replacement of that PA, the executive assistant, etc.? There is a question here about, well, the EAs kind of have had their roles changed massively over time anyway. This just allows those who self-manage their mailboxes, etc., to maybe have some more of that EA functionality brought back into their life that they've kind of done without or have spent now time on, because it's no longer something that everybody gets. Not everybody gets an EA, right? So I don't know. And when it comes to the meetings, it's hard to see how, we use the transcription piece a lot, and mainly because for an inclusivity piece, it allows people to catch up after the fact and everything. But it's still nowhere near good enough, especially when you start getting into technical business speak. It really, really does struggle.
No, and again, I'm surprised their acquisition of, who was it they bought a while back? Nuance, wasn't it? I'm surprised we've not seen more of that technology from a kind of an awareness of language, right? Almost it needs to know the sector you're in and kind of what you're covering off. I think the other point, which would be really interesting, I think one of you raised the point about who's in the meeting, and it would be good when we can actually tell people if we're joining in person or joining remote. And actually, that's another area where you'd hope that don't just tell me that I'm the only person that's attending, but actually, proactively, change the dynamic of my meeting. If I'm the only person attending and I've got a meeting room that's booked for 12 people and I'm going to sit in the boardroom on my own, maybe firstly tell me that I might not want to come in because I'm the only one there anyway. And that's a lot of coffee for one person. Or actually book me a smaller meeting room. And that's some of the intelligence, I think, that would be great. And I think what I'm seeing on roadmap so far is more just the ability to know about these things rather than actually take action. And I think it's the context, isn't it? It's the context awareness of what's going on will be interesting. I mean, where else outside of Teams, right? If you think about the other tools that we use every day, most people spend their life in Outlook. We talked a little bit about some of the intelligence coming into things like Viva and stuff. Is there other places you kind of think Microsoft could do this with ChatGPT? Are there other kind of product areas that you think could be overhauled?
I think the meeting poll in Outlook was always kind of a good step in the right direction, but it was always a little bit too short of a step in my view. So I think making the AI help around arranging people coming together into meetings or whatever else. And I think, Rob, your example about a room, and knowing how many people are turning up and picking the right type of room and the right size is fantastic. I spend so much time trying to gather people together that it's a nightmare just diary managing.
It is, isn't it? I'm a big fan of polls, but like you say, it misses a big step, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think the piece around kind of task management and kind of the Viva Insights you've already mentioned, that can definitely go further. So there's, we all get so much information in so many different places. I think aggregating that into a place that's useful and friendly, and even taking some auto response to some of that as well, right, would be good. I think the best case that I've seen so far with ChatGPT is around kind of coders and developers. So kind of reviewing code that's been written and debugging. So much time saving that we've seen so far. That's necessarily in my organisation yet, because we're not quite there with utilising it. But I've got friends that run software development companies, and they're just seeing so much time saving through just having AI look at code and just finding errors in code.
I've learned loads in Power BI using it. It's really saved me some time.
I imagine, yeah.
Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Or is it all a fad?
Yeah, I'll acknowledge using it for Power BI. I mean, there's times where my job, most of the time, doesn't need to get into that level of detail, but there are times that I just want some data out or whatever. I did it 5 years ago, trying to work out, remember that. It is, it's a great pointer to put you in the right direction and help you, fine tune what you need to do. So, and just to reiterate another point around task management, there's an alternative provider to Microsoft that have got a task. They can basically update the task. It uses AI to rewrite the task for you to a more actionable level. So I know myself that I've often got hundreds of tasks there, and I look at them and I don't really understand what they need to do. And the AI tool writes it in a slightly different way and kind of go, oh yeah, okay, that's really easy. I can do that. It just helps relieve that blocker that you have to task management. So it'd be good to see them leverage that a bit more.
Yes, because most tasks aren't tasks, are they? They're almost notes. And totally hear where you're coming from. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
No, I think just like the others have said, I think we're going to have an interesting decision point as to whether we go with kind of the licensing for kind of the IntelliFrame, where they're sort of talking about sort of bringing that in. So that's probably the biggest challenge. Is that worth it for sort of the engagement with people remotely, to sort of have that kind of auto sort of speaker tracking and the and having the kind of them shown separately. And I think the more they can do with AI to automatically attribute the speaking for the transcripts, to sort of have a transcript which shows Ken said whatever, I said whatever, Paul said whatever. I think the more they can do that, the more advanced they can make that, and the better it'll be and easier it'll be, and lighten the workload of people like the EAs we've talked about, who generally are sort of responsible for sort of tracking some of the larger meetings, really.
I think my final point was probably training as well. I mean, to that point about knowing, there's so many features within the product sets that we use every single day. And I think we still have this challenge that you almost want training and pointers around the tools, almost like those little things that pop up and point at a menu bar, but based on the context of what you're doing. So if you're in a meeting with lots of people, for example, it would be nice for it to, you start asking questions. Why not suggest I use a poll, for example? Or if I'm, constantly replying to people trying to book a meeting room, recognize that I'm doing that and maybe prompt me for a different tool to make that job easier. I think we've still got a long way to come for some of that kind of usage.
Yeah, I mean, the training piece is an interesting one. So we're currently looking at an AI avatar. Now, the way that's populated is you feed it the information and it then converts into a human being and could attend a meeting like this sort of thing. But actually, it's surprisingly realistic. You can make them blink and all manner of different things. And it has all the human mannerisms. But if you imagine powering, this is the next level version of whatever that paperclip was called with Microsoft. If you could actually match ChatGPT to that kind of avatar that can do it all live, so you can ask a conversational question and then Trainer X appears in the meeting room saying, I'd like to call Paul, but I don't know his number. What do I do? And all of a sudden that conversational question hits ChatGPT or something like that. Hits an avatar, and then you could have in-room training for the tools you're using with what feels like a human being. That whole kind of Total Recall weird kind of tech interaction is not far away if Microsoft, which actually really does own all these platforms well enough that really could link this stuff together.
You're right.
And then that paperclip was pretty annoying, but maybe this wouldn't be. I don't know, but we could see.
I look forward to hearing how you get on with that. I've seen a couple of the, Instagram keeps popping up with these kind of little training things. I think, so at some point someone will get one and tell me what it's like. So that person's you. Listen, I think we're just about out of time. Actually, it's been quite a different conversation today. It's been interesting. I think we've just written the next 12 months of roadmap for Microsoft. So if you're listening, Microsoft, you can send some checks our way. Thank you. I've enjoyed that. Thank you. It's been interesting. I guess we'll see what happens on Thursday with some of these teaser trailers that I'm sure that will be announced. But yeah, have a great day, rest of you. Sorry, Jazz, you couldn't join. Hopefully you're listening in the background somewhere. And we'll see you all again next month. Thank you.
Cheers, Ray.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.